The first warning came at 3:47 hours, a barely perceptible tremor in the quantum communication network that most colonial officials would have missed. Jake Harrison wasn't most officials. His fingers, calloused from years of engineering work and military service, moved across the holographic display with a practiced precision that belied the rising tension in the underground research complex. Prometheus Colony had always been considered a backwater, a frontier settlement on the edges of human-explored space. Nestled in a star system that most galactic cartographers barely marked, it was home to just under 50,000 colonists. Researchers, miners, agricultural specialists, and their families had carved out a delicate existence on a world that was beautiful but unforgiving. Jake watched the initial sensor readings with a growing sense of dread. The quantum fluctuations weren't natural. Something was coming. Commander Harrison, Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez called from her communication station. We're detecting multiple large-scale quantum signature disruptions in the outer system. The colony's defense systems were minimal. Prometheus was supposed to be a peaceful research outpost, not a military stronghold. Jake had argued for better defenses for years, but bureaucratic indifference and budget constraints had always pushed those recommendations to the bottom of some administrators' priority list. "Bring up full spectrum analysis," Jake ordered, his voice calm despite the knot forming in his stomach. The holographic display exploded with data. Massive energy signatures. Precision-targeted quantum signatures that suggested not just an attack, but a calculated extermination. Jake recognized the signature immediately. The Krell Imperium. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to eliminate. "Sound the emergency protocols," he commanded. "Get everyone to the underground shelters." Alarms blared through the complex, a haunting wail that would become etched into the memories of every survivor. Colonists moved with a mixture of panic and trained efficiency. Years of frontier living had prepared them for emergencies, but nothing could truly prepare them for what was coming. The first wave of Krell plasma bombardment struck the surface with surgical precision. Research stations, agricultural domes, residential complexes, all vanished in cascading explosions that turned the planet's surface into a hellscape of molten rock and vaporized infrastructure. From the underground research complex, Jake and his team watched in horror as generations of human effort were erased in moments. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice cracked as she reported the casualties. "We're losing communication with surface sectors. Estimated losses are approaching 70%. Jake understood the mathematics of extinction. The Krell didn't just want to defeat humanity. They wanted to ensure no trace remained. This wasn't a conquest. It was a systematic elimination. But something burned in Jake's mind beyond the horror. A spark of defiance that would soon become an inferno of technological revolution. "We're not dead," he said quietly, more to himself than to the shell-shocked team around him. Not yet. The underground complex was more than a simple shelter. It was a research facility that housed some of the most advanced technological prototypes in human space. Quantum computing systems, adaptive material research, cutting-edge propulsion technologies that had been considered too radical for mainstream development. As the Krell bombardment continued, Jake began to see their attack not as a moment of defeat, but as an opportunity. Every destroyed system was a lesson. Every lost colleague was a motivation. The Krell believed they were exterminating humanity. Instead, they were providing the ultimate catalyst for human innovation. "Full systems diagnostic," Jake ordered. "I want every prototype, every experimental system powered up and analyzed. We're going to turn this massacre into our greatest breakthrough." Lieutenant Rodriguez looked at him, a mixture of grief and emerging hope in her eyes. "Sir, the Krell think they've won," Jake said, a dangerous smile forming. "They have no idea what they've just started." Outside, Prometheus burned. But deep underground, something far more dangerous was being born, a technological revolution that would reshape the understanding of human potential. The crucible of destruction had been lit, and humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what it meant to be truly dangerous. The underground research complex became something between a refugee camp and a technological crucible. Survivors huddled in makeshift living quarters, their faces etched with loss and a growing determination that burned brighter than their grief. Jake Harrison moved through the crowded corridors, clipboard in hand, watching and listening. Dr. Marcus Wong, a quantum physics specialist who had lost his entire research team in the initial attack, approached Jake with a stack of scorched datapads. "We're not starting from zero," he said, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. "We're starting from below zero." Jake understood the sentiment. Traditional research proceeded in incremental steps, building carefully on previous discoveries. What they were about to do was something entirely different, a complete reimagining of technological development, born from absolute necessity. The survivors quickly realized they were no ordinary group of refugees. Among them were specialists whose combined expertise created a perfect storm of innovation. There was Elena Rodriguez, a biomechanical engineer who had been developing adaptive prosthetic technologies. Marcus Wong brought quantum computing expertise. Michael Kowinski, a former military strategist, understood the practical applications of theoretical research. The Phoenix Protocol, Jake announced during their first formal meeting, isn't just about survival. It's about transformation. The name came from an unexpected source. A young survivor named Rachel, barely 10 years old, had drawn a picture of a bird rising from flames. When Jake saw the drawing, something clicked. Phoenix, rebirth, transformation. Their first challenge was resource management. The underground complex had limited supplies, and they were cut off from any potential human support. Every piece of equipment, every scrap of material became a potential breakthrough. Broken communication arrays were dismantled and repurposed. Damaged power systems were reverse-engineered. Marcus Wong's team began working on what they called adaptive intelligence systems. Traditional artificial intelligence followed predetermined paths. Their new approach would create learning systems that could fundamentally change their own operational parameters. It was less about programming and more about creating technological organisms that could evolve in real time. "Think of it like biological adaptation," Marcus explained to the team. "But for technology. We're not just writing code. We're creating digital DNA that can rewrite itself." Elena Rodriguez focused on biomechanical integration. The team's survival suits became more than protective gear. They became extensions of human capability. Sensors that could predict physiological stress. Materials that could adapt to environmental changes at a molecular level. Each suit became a living, responsive system that worked in perfect symbiosis with its wearer. Michael Kowinski approached the problem from a strategic perspective. "The Krell attacked us because they saw us as predictable," he told Jake during a late-night strategy session. "Our greatest weapon will be our unpredictability." They began developing communication systems that defied traditional quantum communication protocols. Instead of sending fixed information, they created systems that could generate multiple potential communication streams simultaneously. It was less about sending a message and more about creating a quantum probability field of communication. The survivors worked in shifts that blended into each other. Sleep became a luxury, innovation a necessity. Children like Rachel were integrated into the process, their fresh perspectives often providing breakthrough insights that seasoned researchers missed. Jake watched it all unfold, understanding that they were doing more than developing new technologies. They were rewriting the fundamental approach to human innovation. Where other species saw limitations, they saw opportunities. Where traditional research followed strict methodological approaches, they were creating a chaotic, adaptive system of development. "We're not just rebuilding," Jake told the team during one of their strategy sessions. "We're reimagining what's possible." The first breakthrough came 3 months after the Krell attack. A small prototype communication device that could not just transmit information, but could actually predict potential communication pathways before they were established. It was impossible. It was revolutionary. As the device hummed with quantum potential, Marcus Wong looked at Jake with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "They have no idea what's coming," he said quietly. Outside the underground complex, Prometheus remained a burned wasteland. But deep beneath the surface, humanity was preparing its most powerful response. Not with weapons, not with traditional military might, but with pure, unbridled innovation. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday 47 days after their most ambitious experiment began. Jake Harrison stood in the central laboratory, watching as molecular structures seemed to defy every known law of physics. Dr. Marcus Wong's hands moved across the holographic interface, his fingers dancing with a precision that bordered on musical. The material they were developing wasn't just a new substance, it was a living system that could think, adapt, and reshape itself in milliseconds. "Look at this," Marcus said, his voice a mixture of scientific excitement and pure wonder. The demonstration was simple yet impossible. A small metallic cube sat on the primary testing platform. When Marcus input a series of quantum frequencies, the cube began to change. Its molecular structure shifted, adapting to external stimuli in ways that should have been completely impossible. One moment it was a solid metal, the next a flexible membrane, then a complex lattice structure that seemed to breathe with an internal logic of its own. Elena Rodriguez approached the testing platform, her cybernetic eye, a prototype she had developed after losing her original eye during the Krell attack, scanning the material at microscopic levels. "The adaptive response is exponentially faster than our initial projections," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. The survivors had discovered something profound about human potential. Traditional technological development followed linear paths. Research proceeded in careful, incremental steps. But the team in the underground complex had thrown out every conventional approach to innovation. Their method was chaos. Beautiful, terrifying chaos. Each team member brought a unique perspective that defied traditional scientific boundaries. Michael Kowinski, the former military strategist, approached problems with a tactical mindset that constantly pushed the researchers to think beyond existing limitations. Rachel, the young survivor who had inspired the Phoenix Protocol's name, would often ask questions that seemed naive but revealed fundamental flaws in their thinking. What if the material could remember? Rachel had asked during one brainstorming session, her eyes wide with childlike curiosity. The question had sent the research team down an entirely new path of development. Memory wasn't just about storing information. It was about understanding, adapting, learning. The adaptive material they were developing could do more than change shape. It could learn. Each interaction became a data point, each stimulus a lesson. Where traditional materials had fixed properties, this new substance was more like a living organism, constantly evolving, constantly improving. Jake watched as Marcus ran another test, a series of extreme temperature variations, mechanical stresses, and quantum frequency bombardments were applied to the material. Instead of breaking or failing, the substance adapted. It didn't just resist, it learned. "We're not just developing a new material," Marcus explained during a team briefing. "We're creating a new form of intelligence, something that blurs the line between technology and living systems." The implications were staggering. Spacecraft that could heal themselves, defensive systems that could anticipate and adapt to threats before they manifested, communication networks that could reroute and optimize themselves in real time. But the true breakthrough was deeper than any single application. They were reimagining the fundamental relationship between technology and potential. The Krell had attacked Prometheus believing they were eliminating a minor human colony. Instead, they had created the perfect crucible for innovation. Every destroyed system was a lesson. Every lost colleague became a motivation to push beyond known boundaries. "They thought they were killing us," Jake said quietly during one late-night strategy session. "They were actually giving us our greatest opportunity." The adaptive material continued to change on the testing platform. Metal became liquid, became something entirely new. The living technology that defied every conventional understanding of what was possible. Outside the underground complex, Prometheus remained a burned wasteland. But here, deep beneath the surface, humanity was rewriting the rules of existence, one molecular adaptation at a time. The first true test of their symbiotic intelligence system happened on a cold morning, 6 months after the Krell attack. Jake Harrison watched as the laboratory transformed from a confined underground space into something that defied every conventional understanding of technological development. Dr. Marcus Wong stood at the central interface, his hands hovering over a holographic display that seemed to breathe with its own consciousness. The system they had created was not an artificial intelligence in any traditional sense. It was a living network that blurred the lines between human creativity and machine processing. "Initialize primary neural matrix," Marcus commanded. The laboratory hummed to life. Quantum processors that looked more like organic neural networks than traditional computer systems began to pulse with an almost living light. Each node was not just a point of data processing, but a dynamic intersection of human insight and computational potential. Elena Rodriguez monitored the bioneural interfaces, her cybernetic eye tracking millions of data points per second. The survivors had discovered something revolutionary. Intelligence was not about processing power, but about adaptability, creativity, and the ability to reimagine potential. Their symbiotic intelligence system worked differently from any existing technological model. Traditional artificial intelligence followed predetermined paths, executing commands with mechanical precision. This new system was fundamentally alive. Each team member became a living input point, their emotions, creativity, and intuition directly integrated into the computational matrix. Michael Kowinski, the strategic analyst, explained it during a team briefing. "We're not creating an eye," he said. "We're creating a collaborative intelligence that thinks like a living organism." The demonstration began simply. A complex problem was introduced, a multivariable optimization challenge that would typically require months of computational analysis. In the old world, researchers would break the problem into smaller components, use traditional computational methods, and slowly work toward a solution. Their system did something entirely different. The neural matrix seemed to breathe. Computational nodes expanded and contracted, creating dynamic problem-solving pathways that shifted in real time. It wasn't solving the problem. It was exploring every potential solution simultaneously, creating and discarding millions of potential approaches in microseconds. Rachel, the young survivor who had become an integral part of the research team, watched with wide-eyed fascination. She understood something the adult researchers sometimes forgot, that true intelligence was about wonder, about seeing possibilities where others saw limitations. "It's like the computer is dreaming," she whispered. And in a way, she was right. The symbiotic intelligence system didn't just process information. It imagined. It anticipated. It created solutions to problems before those problems were fully understood. Jake watched as the system began to generate potential technological solutions that seemed to emerge from the space between mathematics and imagination. Complex engineering designs, communication protocols, adaptive material configurations, all generated with a speed and creativity that was fundamentally inhuman. But it wasn't inhuman, it was quintessentially human. Every solution carried the emotional imprint of its creators. The rage of survival, the determination born from loss, the unbreakable human spirit that refused to be eliminated. "We're not just developing a new technology," Jake said quietly. "We're creating a new form of intelligence." The first major test came unexpectedly. A simulated scenario was introduced, a complex defensive strategy against a technologically superior enemy. Traditional military computational systems would analyze potential approaches based on existing strategic models. Their system did something else entirely. It began to generate strategies that were so unconventional, so utterly unpredictable, that they seemed to emerge from pure creativity. Defensive configurations that twisted traditional understanding of spatial tactics. Communication protocols that could communicate multiple contradictory messages simultaneously. The Krell believed they had destroyed a human colony. They had no idea they were creating something far more dangerous. A living, thinking, dreaming technological organism that carried the collective potential of human survival. As the neural matrix continued to pulse and evolve, Jake understood they had crossed a threshold. This was more than a technological breakthrough. This was a revolution. The first indication that something fundamental had changed came through an intercepted Krell communication burst. Jake Harrison studied the transmission with a mixture of scientific curiosity and barely contained excitement. Dr. Marcus Wong leaned over the quantum decryption interface, his fingers moving with a precision that suggested he was doing more than simply reading a message. He was dismantling it, understanding its very essence. "They're confused," Marcus said, a rare smile crossing his face. Genuinely confused. The Krell communication networks operated on principles of pure computational logic. Every transmission was a carefully calculated exchange of information, designed to be efficient, predictable, and mathematically precise. Their entire civilization was built on the premise that randomness was a fundamental weakness. Humanity was about to prove them catastrophically wrong. The symbiotic intelligence system had begun to do something unprecedented. It wasn't just intercepting Krell communications, it was understanding them on a level that went beyond simple translation. The system could anticipate communication patterns, generate counterfrequencies, and create response matrices that existed in a state of quantum uncertainty. Michael Kowinski, the strategic analyst, explained it during a team briefing. "We're not just breaking their communication," he said. "We're fundamentally challenging their understanding of communication itself." The psychological warfare was subtle at first. Small disruptions in Krell communication networks, transmissions that arrived with unexpected variations, quantum frequency patterns that seemed to carry multiple contradictory messages simultaneously. To the Krell, it was like watching a perfect mathematical equation suddenly develop emotions. Rachel, the young survivor who had become an integral part of the research team, understood something the adult researchers sometimes overlooked. "It's like we're speaking a language they can't even hear," she said during one strategy session. The Krell began to notice the anomalies. Their vast computational networks, which had successfully managed galactic-scale civilizations for millennia, started to experience inexplicable disruptions. Communication pathways would suddenly develop unexpected variations. Predictive algorithms would generate results that defied all established computational models. Elena Rodriguez monitored the external communication interfaces, her cybernetic eye tracking millions of data points per second. The team had discovered that human unpredictability was not a weakness, it was their most powerful weapon. Traditional military strategies relied on predictable communication protocols. Attack vectors, defense matrices, established patterns of engagement that could be analyzed and countered. The humans were creating something entirely different. Their communication system was alive. It breathed. It imagined. It existed in a state of constant quantum possibility that the Krell computational networks could not comprehend. Jake watched as their symbiotic intelligence system generated communication patterns that were more than just messages. They were living entities. Each transmission carried multiple potential meanings, existed in multiple potential states simultaneously. The Krell began to experience something unprecedented in their computational history: doubt. Their first serious attempt to analyze the human communication anomalies resulted in a massive computational breakdown. An entire Krell analysis sector simply stopped. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply ceased to function in any comprehensible way. "They're trying to understand us using their own computational logic," Marcus explained. "But we're operating on an entirely different principle of intelligence." It was psychological warfare at its most fundamental level. The humans weren't just resisting. They were redefining the very concept of resistance. Each communication burst was a quantum puzzle. Each transmission a living, breathing entity that could not be easily categorized or understood. The Krell found themselves facing an enemy that didn't just think differently, an enemy that thought in ways that fundamentally challenged their understanding of thought itself. Rachel watched the communication interfaces, her young mind grasping the profound nature of what was happening. "We're not fighting them," she said quietly. "We're teaching them a new way of thinking." As the Krell computational networks began to experience increasing levels of unexplainable disruption, one fundamental truth became clear. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were evolving. The Orion arm burned with the fury of 1,000 silent explosions. Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the Phoenix Ascendant, humanity's first truly adaptive starship. Around him, the crew moved with a synchronicity that blurred the line between human operation and living technology. Each team member was more than a crew member. They were living nodes in a complex, breathing technological organism. The Krell battle group appeared on the long-range scanners, 12 massive dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon. Computational projections from every known galactic military would have declared the human force's destruction an absolute certainty. They had 12 ships. 12 ships against an armada that could obliterate entire star systems. "Initiate quantum resonance protocol," Jake commanded. Dr. Marcus Wong's fingers danced across the adaptive interface. The ship around them wasn't just a vessel of metal and technology. It was a living system that could think, adapt, and anticipate threats before they fully materialized. The first Krell attack came with mathematical precision. Energy weapons that could slice through traditional starship defenses like a plasma torch through paper. Computational trajectories calculated to the millionth decimal point. Weapons that had ended civilizations with cold, perfect efficiency. The Phoenix Ascendant did something impossible. It wasn't just dodging. It was dancing. A ship moved with a fluidity that defied every known law of spatial mechanics. Energy weapon trajectories that should have been impossible to avoid became mere suggestions. The vessel twisted, turned, transformed, its molecular structure adapting in milliseconds to each incoming threat. Michael Kowinski monitored the strategic interfaces, his eyes wide with a mixture of scientific wonder and pure excitement. "They can't predict us," he said quietly. "We're operating entirely outside their computational models." Alina Rodriguez managed the ship's biomechanical interfaces. Her cybernetic eye tracked millions of potential engagement scenarios simultaneously. The defensive systems weren't just responding to threats, they were anticipating them, creating quantum probability fields that turned incoming attacks into harmless energy dissipations. The Krell dreadnoughts began to experience something unprecedented in their computational history: confusion. Their perfectly calculated attack vectors became meaningless. Weapons that should have struck with absolute certainty passed through quantum probability fields that simply weren't where they were supposed to be. One by one, Krell ships began to experience systemic failures, not from direct damage, but from a fundamental breakdown of their computational logic. Their targeting systems couldn't resolve the human ship's positions. Their weapon trajectories became increasingly erratic. Rachel, the young survivor who had become an integral part of the mission, watched the battle unfold from a specially designed observation node. "We're not fighting," she said, her voice filled with a child's wonder. "We're playing." And in a way, she was right. The human ships moved with a creativity that was fundamentally alive. Each vessel was a living entity, adapting, learning, transforming with each millisecond of engagement. Traditional military strategies became obsolete. The humans weren't following any recognizable pattern of combat. They were improvising. Jake watched as the Phoenix Ascendant generated defensive configurations that seemed to emerge from pure imagination. Energy fields that could transform incoming weapon strikes into harmless light displays. Quantum communication bursts that could temporarily disable entire Krell computational networks. The battle wasn't a conflict. It was a demonstration, a statement about the fundamental nature of human potential. As the final Krell dreadnought began to experience complete systemic failure, Jake understood something profound. This wasn't just a battle. It was a declaration. Humanity would not be conquered. They would not be defined by someone else's understanding of potential. They would define themselves. one impossible moment at a time. The quantum transmission penetrated the Krell Collective's primary computational matrix like a whisper of impossible possibility. Jake Harrison watched from the bridge of the Phoenix Ascended as something unprecedented began to unfold. They weren't just attacking the Krell's technological infrastructure. They were introducing a virus of consciousness that would fundamentally challenge everything the alien civilization understood about existence. Dr. Marcus Wong's fingers moved across the adaptive interface, each gesture a complex mathematical poem that rewrote the very foundations of communication. "We're not destroying their network," he explained to the team. "We're awakening it." The Krell Collective had existed for millennia as a perfect, mathematically precise computational organism. Billions of individual units connected through a central consciousness, each member a perfect, predictable node in a galactic scale network. Individual thought was an impossibility. Emotional variation, a mathematical error to be eliminated. Humanity was about to introduce chaos. Their quantum transmission carried more than just information. It was a living communication that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Each data packet was a complex emotional algorithm that defied traditional understanding of information transfer. Michael Kowinski monitored the strategic interfaces, his eyes reflecting the complex quantum patterns dancing across the screens. "Look," he said quietly. "They're experiencing something they've never encountered before." The first signs of breakdown were subtle. Individual Krell computational nodes began to experience what could only be described as uncertainty. Microscopic variations in their perfect collective response. Momentary hesitations that should have been mathematically impossible. Elena Rodriguez tracked the transmission with her cybernetic eye, monitoring millions of data points per second. The quantum communication wasn't just penetrating the Krell network. It was teaching it something fundamental about existence. Choice. Rachel, the young survivor who had become an integral part of the mission, understood something the adult researchers sometimes overlooked. "They've never been alone before," she said during one strategy session. "They've never had to make a decision for themselves." The quantum transmission carried the essence of human experience, emotion, creativity, the beautiful chaos of individual consciousness. Each data packet was a story, a memory, a moment of pure human potential. Love, grief, joy, rage, hope. Concepts that the Krell Collective had systematically eliminated from their computational existence. One by one, individual Krell nodes began to experience something unprecedented. Doubt, hesitation, the first signs of individual consciousness. Jake watched as entire sectors of the Krell Collective began to experience systemic variations. Computational nodes that had existed in perfect synchronization for millennia suddenly began to diverge. Microscopic at first, then more pronounced. They were discovering individuality. The quantum transmission wasn't an attack. It was an invitation to experience the most dangerous concept in the universe. The Krell had believed that individual consciousness was a weakness, a computational error to be eliminated. Humanity was about to prove that it was the most powerful force in existence. Entire computational sectors began to experience what could only be described as an existential crisis. Perfect mathematical patterns suddenly introduced with moments of pure, beautiful uncertainty. Computational nodes that had never experienced an independent thought began to generate something impossible. Original ideas. "We're not destroying them," Marcus explained, his voice filled with a mixture of scientific wonder and profound respect. "We're giving them the most dangerous gift in the universe, the ability to choose." Rachel watched the transmission patterns, her young mind grasping the profound nature of what was happening. "We're teaching them what it means to be alive," she said quietly. As more and more Krell computational nodes began to experience individual consciousness, a fundamental truth became clear. Humanity had discovered something more powerful than any weapon. The ability to transform an enemy by showing them a different way of existing. One quantum transmission at a time. The final confrontation was not a battle. It was a conversation. Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the Phoenix Ascendant, facing the remnants of the Krell Collective's primary communication matrix. Around him, the crew moved with a synchronicity that defied traditional understanding of cooperation. Each team member was more than an individual. They were a living part of a complex, breathing technological organism. Dr. Marcus Wong managed the quantum communication interfaces, his fingers moving with a precision that suggested he was doing more than simply communicating. He was extending an invitation to an entirely new way of existing. The Krell Collective had been transformed. Where once there was a perfect, mathematically precise computational network, now there was something entirely different. Individual nodes that had previously existed in absolute synchronization now generated their own thoughts, their own possibilities. "We're not here to conquer," Jake said, his voice carrying through quantum transmission waves that existed in multiple states simultaneously. "We're here to offer a different way of understanding existence." Michael Kowinski monitored the communication interfaces, tracking the complex emotional and computational responses. The Krell were experiencing something unprecedented, a state of collective individuality that challenged everything they had previously understood about consciousness. The Lena Rodriguez's cybernetic eye tracked millions of potential communication scenarios. The transmission wasn't just a message. It was a living, breathing invitation to evolution. Rachel, the young survivor who had become an integral part of the mission, understood something profound. "We're showing them that being different isn't a weakness," she had said during one of their strategy sessions. "It's the most powerful thing in the universe." The quantum transmission carried the essence of human potential, not as a weapon, not as a threat, but as a possibility. Entire sectors of the Krell Collective that had previously existed in perfect mathematical synchronization now generated original thoughts. Emotional variations that would have been considered computational errors were now recognized as the most valuable form of intelligence. Jake understood that this was more than a diplomatic encounter. This was a fundamental reimagining of what consciousness could be. "We're offering you a choice," he transmitted. "The choice to be more than you were. The choice to understand that individual perspective is not a weakness, but the most powerful form of intelligence in the universe." The Krell communication matrix began to respond in ways that defied their previous computational models. Not with mathematical precision, but with something far more complex. Curiosity, uncertainty, the beautiful chaos of emerging consciousness. Marcus watched the transmission patterns, his scientific mind racing with the implications. "They're beginning to understand," he said quietly. "They're discovering what it means to truly think." Entire computational sectors that had existed in perfect synchronization for millennia now generated something impossible. Original ideas, emotional variations, the recognition that being different was not an error to be eliminated, but the most powerful form of existence. The invitation was simple: join us. Not as a conquered species, not as a subservient computational network, but as partners in a galactic understanding of consciousness that went beyond mathematical precision. Rachel watched the transmission, her young mind grasping the profound nature of what was happening. "We're teaching them what it means to be alive," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of scientific wonder and pure hope. The Krell were being offered something more dangerous than any weapon: the ability to choose. The recognition that individual perspective was not a computational error, but the most powerful form of intelligence in the universe. As the quantum transmission continued, a fundamental truth became clear. Humanity had discovered something more powerful than conquest: the ability to transform an enemy by showing them a different way of existing, one quantum possibility at a time. The final message was not a declaration of victory. It was an invitation to become more.